Temba had always desired wealth. From a young age, he watched the powerful men of his village, Nkulu, with admiration, dreaming of the day when he could acquire such riches. But he knew that for a man of humble beginnings like him, wealth would never come easily. Desperation set in when he was introduced to the dark secrets of Nkulu's ancient spirits, beings who govern not just the land, but the lives of its inhabitants. Temba's mentor, a mysterious elder, explained that to gain prosperity, a man must be willing to pay a price. With no hesitation, Temba agreed. The elder led him to a remote place in the forest, where he was instructed to sacrifice a young girl as an offering to the spirits. In exchange, the spirits promised wealth, success, and endless fortune. But the cost was steep. Temba would never be able to return to his homeland, and he could never remember his mother. The latter part was the hardest for him, as he loved his mother dearly, but the lure of power blinded him. His desire for a better life outweighed all else. The girl was sacrificed, her life extinguished in a dark ritual, and Temba was granted what he sought. But he could never return to the past. The spirit's demand was final and unwavering. As he left Nkulu, Temba's heart was heavy with grief. His mind was clouded by the guilt of what he had done, yet he could not deny that his life began to change. His wealth and status grew rapidly, and he felt the weight of the spirit's power behind his success. He could never forget the price, but he had paid it, and now his life would never be the same. In the years that followed, Temba's life transformed completely. He became one of the wealthiest men in Nkulu. His land stretched as far as the eye could see, and he built a mansion so grand that it became the talk of the village. Yet, as his wealth grew, so did the distance between him and his past. The pact he had made with the spirits, which had once filled him with dread, now seemed like a distant memory. Still, the heavy sense of guilt lingered in the back of his mind, but it was masked by his success. Temba married Ife, a woman of grace and beauty. Their love story was one that filled the hearts of the villagers with admiration. They were the perfect couple, with their twin daughters, both as beautiful and joyful as their mother. Temba thought he had finally achieved everything he wanted: wealth, love, and family. But even in the glow of his happiness, a shadow followed him, something that gnawed at the edges of his mind. His promise to the spirits, the darkness he had embraced, had to be kept. No matter how happy his new life seemed, there were parts of his soul that remained untouched by joy. Despite the success and the love of his family, Temba kept a secret, a locked room in his mansion that Ife was forbidden from entering. It was a room that held the darkest remnants of the deal he had made. The spirit's demands were still present, haunting him in ways he couldn't ignore. Each night, as he lay in bed beside Ife, the thought of the room kept him awake, filled with a quiet dread that he couldn't shake. The pact had made him powerful, but at what cost? He couldn't escape it, not without risking everything he had built. As Temba's wealth and success grew, so did Ife's curiosity about the locked room in their mansion. There had always been something about Temba's secrecy that troubled her. He had changed since they moved into the mansion, becoming more distant and guarded. One evening, while rearranging their home, Ife approached him as he stood near the door to the mysterious room. "Temba," she said, her voice soft but insistent. "What is behind that door? Why do you never let me in?" Temba's face darkened. The question hit a nerve. He had kept the room locked for a reason, but now, with Ife standing before him, his secret felt like an insurmountable wall. "It's nothing, Ife," he replied, forcing a calmness in his voice that he didn't feel. "Just some old things from the past. Things you don't need to know about." But Ife wasn't convinced. She stared at him with concern in her eyes, searching for the truth beneath his cold response. "You've changed so much since we came here. Why keep it locked away?" Temba felt a pang of guilt. He had worked so hard to build this life with her, but the truth of his past was something he could never share. Ife didn't need to know the darkness he carried with him. "I've told you it's nothing," he repeated firmly, trying to end the conversation. "Please don't ask again." Ife nodded, though the concern in her eyes remained. She didn't understand, but she respected his wishes. Temba could feel the pressure mounting. The truth of his pact, the sacrifice he had made, was a burden that weighed heavily on his soul. It was a secret that threatened to consume him, yet there was no escape. The spirits had made sure of that. Once a month, Temba would attend secret meetings with the elders of Nkulu. These were not gatherings that anyone could attend, but only those who had pledged themselves to the spirits. The elders were the gatekeepers of the ancient traditions, and they held immense power. Temba's wealth and status were the result of his pact with them, and as much as he despised the dark rituals, he knew he could never break his connection with the spirits. Each meeting filled him with dread, but he had no choice. The price of his success demanded it. Every year, on the final day of the year, Temba would renew the terms of his agreement with the spirits. The ritual was both a blessing and a curse, an affirmation that he would continue to thrive, but it also meant another year of servitude to the spirits. Temba hated it. The sacrifices, the dark whispers in his ears, it was more than he could bear. Yet, with each passing year, he felt he had no choice. To defy the spirits would mean the destruction of everything he had worked so hard for. The wealth, the land, the power, everything would be lost. As Temba sat at these meetings, surrounded by the other men of power, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was trapped. The spirits were always watching, always demanding. Every time he left the meeting, he felt a piece of his soul slip further away. It wasn't just the fear of losing his riches that kept him bound to the covenant. It was the overwhelming sense that there was no way out, that he was doomed to serve the spirits for the rest of his life. Temba's twin daughters, Zuri and Amina, grew older with each passing year. Their laughter filled the mansion, their innocence a stark contrast to the darkness lurking in Temba's heart. He loved them deeply. They were the light of his life, but their presence reminded him of the terrible price of his success. His daughters were everything to him, yet he couldn't shake the thought that one day he might have to sacrifice one of them, just as he had done years ago. The pact with the spirits was unyielding, and it demanded that more lives be offered. As his daughters neared their 7th birthday, Temba felt an overwhelming sense of dread. They were growing up so fast, and soon they would be old enough to understand the truth. The thought of losing one of them haunted him. How could he choose which daughter to sacrifice? He couldn't bear the thought, but he knew that the spirits would demand it sooner or later. Every time he looked at them, his heart twisted. They were so full of life, so pure in their love for him. They trusted him completely, but Temba couldn't shake the fear that one day he would have to betray that trust. The spirits would not let him live in peace until their demands were met. And Temba knew deep down that the day would come when he would have to make the impossible choice. Would he sacrifice his daughter to the spirits in order to preserve his wealth and power? Or would he defy the spirits and risk losing everything? Certainly, as the days passed, Temba's anxiety grew. The spirits' whispers never left him, and every time he looked at his daughters, the weight of the pact grew heavier. Zuri and Amina were now nearing their 7th birthday, and Temba found it harder to hide his inner turmoil. He had promised the spirits that he would sacrifice one of them when they turned 7. It was a part of the ritual that he couldn't escape. The pact was binding, and the spirits did not show mercy. Temba loved his daughters with all his heart. They brought joy into his life, and every laugh, every smile, filled him with pride. But they also reminded him of the darkness he had embraced all those years ago. The thought of having to choose between them tore him apart. Ife, too, noticed the changes in him. His once warm and joyful nature had given way to a cold, distant demeanor. He was restless, withdrawn, and she couldn't understand why. "Is something wrong, Temba?" Ife asked, concern in her voice as she watched her husband struggle with his thoughts. Temba would not meet her gaze. He didn't know how to explain to her the curse he had brought upon their family. How could he tell her that the spirits demanded a price for everything they had? "I'm fine," he lied, but the lie felt hollow. He knew Ife wouldn't believe him forever. She would see through his facade eventually. And when she did, what would happen? Would she leave him, just as his pact had demanded he abandon his own mother? The thought of losing her, too, haunted him. It was on the night of the covenant meeting that Temba's worst fears were realized. The elders, who had once been mere figures in his life, now held his future in their hands. The meeting was held in the deep recesses of the forest, under the cover of darkness, where the spirit's presence was strongest. Temba arrived, his heart heavy with dread. As he entered the sacred grove, the elders looked at him with knowing eyes. They had seen the turmoil in him. They could feel the struggle in his soul. The head elder, his face shadowed by the moonlight, spoke first. "Temba, the spirits have made their demand. Your daughters are now of age. One must be given to them." Temba's breath caught in his throat. The words seemed to echo in his mind, drowning out all other thoughts. One of his daughters. His beautiful, innocent daughters. How could he choose? The elder continued, his voice firm and unwavering. "The spirits require a sacrifice, Temba. It is the way of things. The land will wither, and your wealth will crumble if you fail to honor your pact. You know the cost. Choose." Temba felt as if the ground beneath him was crumbling. His mind raced, but the truth was clear. The spirits would destroy everything he had worked for if he defied them. His wealth, his family, his life, all of it would vanish. But how could he make such a choice? How could he choose between his daughters? "I cannot do this," Temba whispered, his voice trembling. "I cannot sacrifice my child." The elder's expression didn't change. "You have no choice. The spirits are relentless. You will obey, or everything will be lost." Temba left the meeting in a daze, his mind reeling. The weight of the decision pressed down on him. He couldn't live with the thought of losing one of his daughters. But what was the alternative? He couldn't bear to think about it. The spirits had him trapped. Temba lay awake that night, the cold sweat clinging to his skin. Ife slept beside him, oblivious to the torment he was going through. The hours dragged on, and Temba could not escape the image of his daughters. Their laughter, their innocence, their trusting faces, it all haunted him. But how could a father ever choose between his own children? The thought of betraying them twisted his insides, but he knew the consequences of defying the spirits. His wealth, his power, everything he had worked for, it would all be taken away. He couldn't let that happen. Couldn't there be another way? A way to break the pact without losing everything? But the spirits were unforgiving. They had given him everything, but their price was steep. He realized that there was only one thing left to do: make the hardest decision of his life. It was a quiet evening when Temba decided to take one of his daughters for a walk. Zuri had been particularly excited about the idea, and she chattered away as they walked through the village. Temba, however, was numb. His mind was elsewhere, racing with thoughts of the upcoming sacrifice. He had no choice. Temba stopped at a familiar spot, the place where he had dug the hole. His heart pounded in his chest, and his hands trembled as he knelt to gather the soil. Zuri looked up at him, her innocent eyes shining in the moonlight. "Father, why are we here?" she asked, skipping ahead. "Father, why do you look so sad?" Zuri's voice broke through his thoughts, and Temba's heart shattered. The love he felt for her was overwhelming, and yet he knew he was about to betray her. He knelt down, his hands trembling as he pushed her into the hole. "I'm sorry, my love," he whispered, his tears mixing with the dirt as he began to bury her. Her voice echoed in his ears, but he couldn't stop. He couldn't turn back. Zuri had vanished without a trace, and the villagers began searching frantically for her. Temba pretended to be as shocked and distressed as everyone else, but deep down he was numb. He had done what the spirits demanded, and now he could only wait for the inevitable consequences. Ife, too, noticed the change in him. His eyes were haunted, his once warm smile now a distant memory. "I don't understand," Ife said one night, her voice trembling. "Where is she, Temba? Where is our daughter?" Temba could barely meet her gaze. The guilt that gnawed at his insides threatened to consume him. "She's gone, Ife. I don't know where she is." Ife's suspicion grew, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Her once loving husband had become a stranger. Each day, he became more distant, his eyes haunted by the loss of their child. It wasn't long before she began to question him, but the truth was too terrible to face. Days passed after Zuri's disappearance, but the grief in Temba's heart never faded. Every time he looked at Amina, his second daughter, the image of Zuri's smiling face haunted him. She had been so full of life, so trusting. And now she was gone, swallowed by the darkness of his actions. Temba could not escape the guilt that gnawed at him. His love for Amina was deep, but now it was overshadowed by the knowledge of what he had done. Ife, too, was slowly unraveling. She could not ignore the strange changes in Temba. He was no longer the man she had married. His eyes, once full of love and warmth, were now cold and distant. His sleepless nights and trembling hands told a story she could not yet fully understand. There was something else, a shadow that lingered in his heart, something he refused to talk about. "Why are you so distant, Temba?" Ife asked one evening, her voice soft with concern as she watched him from across the room. "Why do you act as though you are carrying a burden you cannot share?" Temba couldn't answer her. The truth was too painful to speak, and he feared that even admitting it would drive Ife away. He had already lost so much. He could not bear to lose her, too. But in his silence, the guilt only grew stronger. Ife noticed the way Amina would ask about her sister. Every morning, the little girl's face would light up as she ran to her father, asking why Zuri wasn't with her. It broke Temba's heart to lie to her, but he did it anyway, day after day. Ife's suspicion grew with each passing day. She had always trusted Temba, believed in him with all her heart, but now something was wrong. It wasn't just the absence of Zuri. It was the cold, haunted look in Temba's eyes, the way he withdrew from everything. She couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something. But what? What could be so terrible that he couldn't share it with her? One evening, she caught him pacing in the mansion, his face twisted in anguish. Sweat poured down his brow, and his hands were clenched into fists. "Temba, what's going on?" Ife asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why are you acting like this? What happened to you?" Temba froze, his heart pounding. He had been trying so hard to keep his secret buried, but now, it was as if it was bubbling to the surface. His past, his pact with the spirits, it all seemed to be coming back to haunt him. How could he explain it to Ife? How could he make her understand? "Ife," he began, his voice raw with emotion, I've made a terrible mistake. A mistake I can never undo. The spirits, the ones who gave me everything, they demanded something from me. And I sacrificed Zuri." His words were barely audible, and they hung in the air like a heavy, suffocating weight. Ife gasped, her face pale. What? What are you saying, Temba? How could you? I had no choice. Temba cried, his voice breaking. The spirits would have taken everything. Our wealth, our lives, everything we've built. I had to do it, Ife. I had to sacrifice our daughter to keep everything safe. Ife's world crumbled in that moment. She had suspected something, but she never could have imagined the horror of his confession. Tears filled her eyes, but they were not just tears of sorrow. They were tears of disbelief, anger, and betrayal. How could Temba, the man she had loved for so many years, do such a thing? Why, Temba? She whispered through her sobs. Ife stood in stunned silence, her heart breaking as she looked at the man she had once called her partner. The man she had trusted with her life, with the lives of their children, had betrayed that trust in the most unimaginable way. Zuri was gone, and in her place was a cold, broken man who could not even look her in the eye. I can't stay here, Temba, Ife whispered, her voice hoarse with emotion. I can't be with you anymore. Not after what you've done. Temba's breath caught in his throat. Ife, please don't leave me. I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted any of this. But I'm bound to the spirits, and I thought I could protect you. Ife shook her head, tears streaming down her face. You've lost yourself, Temba. You've lost everything. I can't stay with someone who has done something so horrible. I can't look at you the same way anymore. Temba felt as though the ground was slipping out from under him. Ife, his love, his partner, was leaving him. And worse, she was taking Amina with her. The thought of losing both his family and his soul was too much to bear. I'm sorry, Ife, he whispered, his voice breaking. I'm so sorry. But Ife couldn't stay. She didn't know where she would go, but she knew she couldn't remain in that mansion, in that house of lies and darkness. With Amina in tow, She left the place that had once been their home, and Temba was left alone, surrounded by the emptiness of his choices. Alone in the mansion, Temba was a shell of the man he had once been. His wealth, his lands, his mansion, they were all meaningless now. His heart ached with the loss of Ife and Amina. But even more so, it ached with the loss of his humanity. The spirits had promised him everything, but they had taken everything in return.